Alright, this is notes on how to set up a histogram. We're going to be using the data collected from class on the number of states visited. So, looking at that data, the first thing we need to do is find the range. The range is your high minus low value. So, the person that visited the most state was 50. Someone has visited all 50 states. And the low was 4. So if we subtract that, we get 46. That's going to be our range. Alright, next we need to find the number of classes. So we had 28 people that answered the survey, so we're going to take the square root of 28 and then round it. So the square root of 28 is closer to 5 than it is to 6, so that means we're going to have 5 classes when we go to set this up. These give me guidelines on how to set up a large set of data. Alright, we need to know wide to make the classes. So we're going to take the range, which was 46, and divide by the square root of 28, which is approximately 5, and then we're going to round up. So we're going to get 9.2, and we're going to round that up to 10. So that means we're going to put a range of 10 in each class. Like I said, this gives us guidelines on how to set up a large pieces of data. Okay, so let's set up those classes using that information. Make sure you write this down before we go to the next slide so you'll have it to work with. Alright, so let's do our setup work. Our classes are the number of states visited. So we're starting with 4 because that was our lowest number. And we're going up to, we're going to add 10 plus 4, which is 14. The next class starts at 14. Notice our classes should not overlap, but also should not have any gaps. We're going to add 10, so we're going to stop at 24. We're going to start our next class at 24. So 24 would be included in this third class. Alright, and we're going to add 10, and we get 34. And keep following the same pattern. So 34 up to 44. And then finally 44 up to, now if I add 10, I get 54. They're not 54 states. So I'm going to stop this at 50. Less than or equal to 50, because there's only 50 states. So these are my classes. Shorthand notation, you can also write them like this. You just got to keep in mind about the upper and lower bounds. So this is shorthand notation, but it means the inequality that's to the left. So 14, if we had somebody visited 14 states, they would be in the second class, not the first class. So you include the lower bound, this is the lower bounds, and the upper bound, it gets up to, so if we had possibly could visit 13.9 states, can't do that because these are discrete values, it would go in the first class. But if I did visit at 14.1 states, alright, we'd be in the second class. Alright, we need to tally our information. So just go through and figure out, using the data, how many belong in each class. Alright, so here's the results I got. 10, 13, 2, 1, and 2. Let's change these to percents. I'm going to round to one decimal place. Alright, so this is a frequency distribution. This is a distribution of the data. We're going to use this distribution to draw our histogram. Okay, so let's draw the histogram. Like I said, use those guidelines. It kind of gets, it leads you through, so it's not trial and error. You get a nice setup, and then you can adjust where you start these values to get the nicest setup of the classes. There's not one perfect answer. Like I said, you can set it up slightly different and still get a great histogram. Okay, I'm just going to insert another page to draw my histogram. So when we draw our histogram, we need a vertical line and a horizontal line. Alright, the number of states are going to go across the bottom. I'm going to do this as a relative frequency histogram, so I'm going to do my percents up the sides. Alright, so number of state visited, always label. So we start with 4, we go up to 14, adding 10, 24, 34, 44, and then stopping at 50. Alright, so 46% was my highest. I'm going to count by fives. Alright, the height of the rectangle corresponds to our percentage. So I've got a little over 35.7%. I've got 46.4%, 7.1%, 3.6%, and 7.1%. Alright, so here's my histogram. Alright, my histogram appears to be skewed right. If you need to pause the video, you can do so at any time if you need more time to copy something down. But use guidelines. Like I said, just walk it through. The example off the paper on the presidents, just walk it through the exact same thing that I did to figure out how many to go in each class. Alright, let's talk about a density histogram. You use a density histogram when the class widths are not the same. So we can't have frequency up the side. We're going to have density instead. So density is defined as the relative frequency, which is the percentage, divided by the class width. So now we can work backwards on this to find the frequency on something like this. That's the kind of questions I've seen on our AP test, if possibly. Density histograms really don't. Alright, didn't cut that off before our announcement went off, but okay. Frequency or density histograms don't show up very often on the AP test. If it is, it's going to be a multiple choice question. But what we can do with this, if I want to figure out how many the frequency in the second class, I can use this formula. Alright, so what I'm going to do here is I know that the density, if I'm looking over to the graph, the density corresponds to 5. So I'm just going to use this formula. So 5 is equal to, alright, I'm looking for the relative frequency. That's going to be my x. The class width is 1.4 minus 1.3. And I'm just going to solve this for x. So 5 equals x over 0.1. So x is equal to 0.5. So that means that 50%. 50% of my sample size was in that class. Okay, so that's how we can go back to find relative frequency. Don't forget that when you talk about graphs, you need to talk of socks, center, shape, and spread must be talked about with each of your graphs. That's what that worksheet is focusing on, being able to compare distributions. Outliers and clusters, which also include gaps, occur, that's just on a graph by graph basis. Make sure that you're using comparative language. So like talking about the spread. We'd say that graph 1, if graph 1 is spread out more, we said graph 1 has more variability than graph 2. Make direct comparisons. That's what we're going to be looking for on that AP test. Okay, I hope this helps. If you have any questions, please ask.